A special Savvy Chat today. It is Wednesday as opposed to our usual Sunday, but that's because we had the holiday this past Sunday and Monday, and we have a super exciting guest today. Andre Blackman is joining us to talk about one of Savvy's core values, about championing inclusivity. And this is going to be such an awesome conversation because he's truly somebody that's kind of pioneering the way that we're thinking about this in healthcare. And so we're grateful to be joined by him. Andre is the founder of Onboard Health, which he's going to tell you about too. He also has a background in strategy and branding. He's been an advisor to multiple different organizations, including things like South by Southwest, the Mayo Clinic, the list goes on. So he's going to be able to share some of that expertise with us here today. So Andre, we're always taking these calls from the road. Tell us where you're calling in from today.
Yes, thank you so much, Jen. So I'm calling in from Raleigh, North Carolina today.
Ooh, excellent. So we're going to really kind of dive through, and I really want to get to the bottom of talking about inclusion. And I'm not sure that everybody is even familiar with that term. People might be more familiar with things like talking about diversity, but how would you start to think about defining something like inclusion?
Yeah, so oftentimes we hear the phrase diversity and inclusion. So a great quote that has always rung in the back of my head is from Verna Myers, and you kind of spell her name Verna. But she kind of sums it up as diversity is being invited to the party, and inclusion is being asked to dance. So that a lot of that kind of participatory aspect as well. And so essentially inclusion has to do a lot with belonging. So, especially like in the workplace, if you bring people to the table, to the company, from diverse backgrounds, that's the representation piece, that's diversity. Inclusion has to do with kind of digging a little bit deeper, right? And then really focusing on that belonging piece, like what makes each of these individuals, each of these employees, feel like they belong. And that takes into account their culture, their background, all that sort of thing. So, and once again, like in the workplace, this really adds to that sustainability, really increases, work performance and things of that nature. But really inclusion has to do with being asked to, fully contribute and fully show up.
And so I think that's a great sort of explanation between the difference of diversity and inclusion, but really we are talking about the diverse individuals who need to be included. So, you and I have talked about this before, that there are various different areas that matter that we need to think about in terms of diversity. And, some people might think that's just things like talking about things like ethnicity, but for you, how do you think about that? Since you work in this area, what areas do you want people to start looking at to make sure that they have diverse individuals weighing in?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Jen. So for me, diversity has once again to do with representation, right? We have a number of diverse communities in our society, in our country, and each of those people contribute to various, ventures and jobs and things of that nature. So for me, diversity, really takes into account the ethnicity, the gender piece, but also areas like, if you're a member of the LGBTQ community, right? And for me, like becoming a new dad, almost 2 years ago, even parents, right? Like looking at, people who are re-entering the workforce, from, paternity or maternity leave, those kind of things, but also age and, disability. Those are all things that make up our society that, oftentimes contribute new perspectives. And that's another big reason for the importance of diversity. So, those are some key areas when I start thinking about diversity. There's obviously, diversity of kind of thought and perspective, but those are some of the main upfront areas that I think about. And when it comes to things like disabilities or certain health conditions, right? Like oftentimes they might not be as visible or very kind of, front facing. And that's another thing to consider when it comes to diversity.
And so, I think that's a great sort of overview of there's so many different things that we should be thinking about when it comes to thinking about who is that diverse individual. And so I guess one of the questions that we face too is about why does this matter? Why does it matter if we're talking to those different people other than ourselves, do we have to talk with them and include them in various things, or is it kind of good enough if we just remember that they're there and we think about them and we keep their interests in mind? Can we do that, or is it something we need to actually have these touch points with these diverse individuals?
Yeah, once again, great question, Jen. So, thinking about that question kind of reminds me of my career, like in the public health landscape, right? So my background's this crazy mix of communications, public health, and engineering. But coming from the public health side, not that long ago, we would have these kind of massive media campaigns that would come out for like certain groups. So, for example, I remember working on a campaign that targeted 18 to 24-year-old African Americans, making sure that you're talking to your partner about your sexual status, right? So really looking at, HIV, AIDS, STD prevention, that sort of thing. And, oftentimes these campaigns would have, I think, the experts like huddled in a room together, kind of thinking through all the demographic and the data and all the reports that have been made. And then they kind of create the campaign and then kind of like issue it out to the people without actually co-creating it with them, right? So, this is, fast forwarded to around, I'd say around 2005, 6, 7, where, you still have these like massive media campaigns, right, that were targeting, African Americans or young African Americans or young Latinos or young Latinas. And oftentimes the mark would be missed. All this money would be made, the mark would be missed, mainly because there's still nuances inside of each of these kind of communities, right? And oftentimes the people that are putting together the campaigns, aren't part of those communities, right? And so when we talk about, is it enough to say like, you know what, we should really kind of, keep these people in mind and kind of target them and look at some of our data. I think we're out of time to be thinking in that perspective, right? Like we don't have enough time to have that keep in mind mentality. We need to actually build alongside of people in a much more iterative process, right? And so, once again, this has to do, if we're thinking about it from a product strategy or, a startup, right? Like you hear the term minimal viable product, right? For the MVP, and this has a lot to do with testing things, right? You have a theory or you have an idea, you have a hypothesis, you want to test it out. Instead of going, all the way down the line and spending a lot of money and only to see it, in the case of, campaigns, to see kind of the, the flyers kind of peeling off the bus stops or whatever after like 3 or 4 months. And people have long forgotten the tagline or the catchy catchphrase and things of that nature. Like, how has it really resonated? And so for me, it absolutely does matter to actually have diverse individuals included, designed with, have conversations on a rolling basis. A lot of the things that are changing in our landscape now, not just from a media perspective, but just from from a social justice, civic, quality kind of perspective, things are changing. There are opinions, and we need to like really keep that in mind when we build for any kind of impact, is to co-create and to work alongside of people.
Well, you're not going to get any arguments from me. That what Savvy is all about is helping people find those individuals to be able to tap into and create those relationships so that they have those touch points early and often so that they don't go down the wrong path. So you perfectly described what we're trying to do. But I think also it goes further than that. And that's where what you're doing, I think, really integrates it, because it's one thing to go talk to those individuals and to make sure that they're included and we hear their voices come through on a campaign, on our product, et cetera, because of course we want them to be effective. But it takes an extra layer of making sure that there are people throughout an organization who are actually championing that kind of work. And that's where it's going to take that buy-in from various different levels. So that's what, thinking about what you're doing at Onboard Health, it just complements this so well, because you're trying to actually match companies in the healthcare space with diverse talent so that they can have those individuals as part of their workforce and really help to make sure that this kind of work is happening. So why does that aspect matter? Or can you just have, I mean, frankly, can you have just a bunch of white folks that all look the same and live in the same area of the country and about the same age? Can they still be designing for diverse individuals? Or what's the extra layer that having that diverse workforce really brings to the table?
Yeah, I mean, one of the core aspects of what we're doing, at Onboard Health to build that kind of inclusive workforce ecosystem, we're really looking at powering the future of health, right? And so, we're all very tuned into a lot of, things like health disparities that are impacting various groups in our society. And for me, if we're looking at the sustainable solution piece, right? If we want things to not just be a one-off product or a one-off campaign, but we actually want to bake health into our society, it's absolutely critical to have the people at the table who have these diverse experiences and backgrounds and insights and skill sets to come to the table to build these long-term solutions. So particularly if we're looking at, companies that have an impact on the future of health, whether that has to do with food sustainability or the built environment, right? Like where we live, affordable housing, that sort of thing. Mental health, chronic disease, things of that nature, or the upstreaming of healthcare, right? We talk about the social determinants of health now. That's a popular concept that originated in the public health world and is now kind of being applied to healthcare as a whole. If we're talking about the workforce, right? Like it just from a general like modern workforce perspective, right? It just makes sense, right? It makes sense to have people that represent our society in our offices doing this kind of work. But another layer has to do with actual ROI and having that competitive advantage. McKinsey, I think back in 2015, kind of published a report around like diversity, why it matters for the workplace, and building diverse teams gives you the competitive advantage when you have different perspectives. You have people that don't think this kind of homogenous kind of perspective because you're able to see like, okay, well, what about this? What about that? That just kind of adds the competitive advantage to the company. And this is kind of one of the things that I talked about on a panel actually at South by Southwest a few years ago, when kind of Dove was having some sort of campaign around different shades of skin and women and things of that nature. And that was one of those things where they saw an increase in sales. They saw an increase in just kind of brand loyalty. It actually helps overall from a business perspective. McKinsey also put out like a report in 2018 as well that just kind of continued to reinforce the financial aspects of having diversity on the team, right? And once again, it's having diverse team members, but also that inclusion piece is you're welcoming these kind of opinions and insights to the table, really making it a priority and being intentional about it. Another kind of aspect that we've seen over the past few years that, people aren't staying at companies for 20, 25, 30 years, 40 years anymore, right? Like, our parents' generation or our grandparents' generation, like, you got hired at a company, you just kind of put your head down and, stuck it out for, most of your life. And that just is not the modern workplace anymore, right? So nowadays people are looking for, companies that pay attention to who they are and how they can bring themselves to the table, how they could, build in wellness to the employees, right? It's not just kind of that input output piece anymore, right? There's more factors that are coming to the table, and as a company, that has an intentional focus and actions around building an inclusive workforce environment, you're going to win, and that's just kind of the natural flow of things right now, and it's for the better. So I would definitely say, like, from a workforce perspective, this is exactly why having a diverse workforce matters.
And so, you're somebody who talks about these things, you're out there giving talks and whatnot. And I'm just curious, because we face this all the time too, is trying to kind of share a message that a lot of people are on board with, but to some, there's still a bunch of resistance there and trying to understand why they need to do it. So I'm curious what sort of challenges you faced in trying to share that explanation and the mission that you're working on with other companies. And kind of within that is, do you notice if there's a difference when you talk to smaller versus larger companies and where kind of they're at and either being nimble or having resources? How have you kind of noticed that?
Yeah. So throughout 2017, I spent a lot of time talking to a number of startups and companies around this topic, particularly companies that had some sort of impact, once again, on building the future of health. And it was less, and regardless of size, it was less about resistance or I'm not sure why this matters. And it was more so like, how do we do this, right? How do we make this happen? How do we find diverse talent? You know, we can't, necessarily just say, in a job description, right? Like we're looking for diverse candidates only, per se, right? So it was a lot of the question was, we know that this is needed and we know that this is valuable, but how do we go about doing it? And so I think that that's one of the main takeaways that I got from a lot of conversations. And especially like now as we're, actively engaging companies and working alongside of them to educate them on, what are the next steps, let's do an assessment, that sort of thing. I think large companies might have a more involved time to kind of shift the needle on certain things. Once you get that buy-in, once you get that kind of universal understanding about we need to move forward, then it's the work of actually moving forward and kind of tweaking and changing policies and looking at programs, looking at how you recruit, how you build in job descriptions. So I think for larger companies, the issue just has to do with kind of moving a larger institution with more employees and that sort of thing forward. And so for smaller companies and startups, what we've been seeing is that a lot of the companies want to get started on the right foot as soon as possible. And with less employees, kind of less stuff that has been accumulated over the years, they're a lot more nimble and agile and able to get buy-in across from leadership, and we get access to leadership a lot easier than at larger companies to say like, hey, this is what we want to do. Let's communicate. Okay, this sounds good. That sounds good. Let's move forward. So definitely the kind of turnaround time on moving forward changes by size of company. One of the things that has not been too different is the need for talent, right? Like actively looking for great people to work on your company's mission is always something that companies, regardless of size, are looking for. So that's been a good thing for us, related to the work that we want to do around, sourcing the talent and making sure that the talent gets ported into the right kinds of companies, that retention, opportunities are in place and that sort of thing. So I think the talent piece is pretty universal. There might be more opportunities at larger companies given the amount of roles that are open. But as far as the differences and the challenges, it's definitely, guiding these companies around, where they are at in their kind of business model and kind of the life of their company and things of that nature.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I'm not sure how one would quantify this or qualify it, but do you have any like success stories of when somebody has, used your services to be able to connect with diverse individuals, or even just in general? What have you heard anecdotally about when people finally start to engage more diverse individuals?
Yeah.
Are there seeing any sort of difference?
Yeah, I mean, well, I'll start on the so we're doing two things with Onboard Health, right? On one hand, we're actually growing the diverse talent community, right? And so since we've been putting out social and our newsletter and things of that nature, just kind of curating great job opportunities and insights and articles around building the future of health, we've gotten tremendous feedback from our community as far as finding this kind of information, allowing the community members to get plugged in right in their backyard. So like last year, We partnered up with George Washington University and the lab at DC, which is kind of the data science kind of team in Washington, DC. And so, we had this great in-person event where we had 20 of our DC-based Onboard Health community members go out and hear about, the impact of the future of data and civic / public health innovation. And, a number of our, members who went out there, live tweeted, took pictures. We include that in our newsletter, that sort of thing. So that was a great, showing of how we're engaging our community with institutions and organizations and thought leaders on a local level to kind of reinforce the access and acceleration of their careers and impact. So that's a great kind of benefit and success story from the talent side. Apart from just the general thanks for sharing this. This has been amazing. And on the employer side, it just has to do with we were looking for a solution that had to do with this, right? Like looking at talent, looking at ways for us to build our brand and to get in front of amazing, dynamic and diverse talent. So that's just been the sentiment, but also kind of working alongside of companies to start doing those assessments and audits and getting them up to speed on looking at the clear ROI around tackling inclusion, especially with the lens of the future of health. So it's just been an amazing journey so far over the past year and a half, just kind of seeing the warm reception that we're getting around the mission, but also how we're just kind of rolling it out to amazing people.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. I mean, the work that you're doing. So we've got our listeners, so that people are going to hear this later. They want to know, okay, how do they access a diverse workforce through Onboard Health? So walk me through that process.
Yeah, absolutely. So once again, if you are looking for roles and things of that nature, or you want to get plugged into what's happening in the future of health, particularly from that sustainability piece, for example, looking at food sustainability and how that intersects with technology or design or the business of food sustainability, right? So all these things kind of swirling together has to do with our focus, right, on roles, but also content. So going to onboardhealth.co, you can sign up, and that's how you essentially join the community. And right now, you'll get the Sunday morning newsletter. You'll get access to events in and around your city and specific regions. So right now, we're looking at geographic regions like Atlanta, here in Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina, Washington, D.C., Maryland, Virginia, that kind of area where I grew up, Boston, Philadelphia, New York, Chicago, and then San Francisco. And so those are the cities that we're really kind of right now working to really build these kind of deep relationships with talent and employers. And so essentially that is kind of how we're growing the talent community, but also, anywhere you are and want to get plugged into opportunities and how to really, provide access and acceleration for your career is essentially what we're doing for the talent community. From the employer side, we're doing kind of three things and how to engage. So once again, looking at that learning and education piece, right? So coming in, helping to assess and do an audit of kind of what you're currently working on, and then giving you an action plan and a roadmap to kind of move forward around inclusion, building that out. So really kind of giving you those kind of tools and setting the foundation. The second part has to do with the talent, right? And so kind of getting plugged into our talent community and our platform, whether that's posting some jobs, doing executive search to build your company. That's how we're working in the talent area. And then finally, we're helping to tell the stories of these companies, right? So the brand engagement piece is exactly what has been a big part of my career, and what I really love doing is making sure that companies are front and center into our community and helping them around their communication, co-creation of content. So we have the Sustainable Future blog where we're excited to get ready to launch some 3 and 6-part series looking at the future of health, and as well as our in-person events. So as I mentioned before, we had an event in DC last fall. We had another one in this past spring. with our partners at Common Health Action in downtown DC. And we're, preparing to do some more in the various cities that I mentioned before. So really kind of bringing that kind of brand engagement and storytelling piece to our community, and just kind of highlighting what they're doing to build the future of health.
That's amazing. And, I think people oftentimes want to know the stories behind this. So why did you start Onboard Health? Where did this come from outside of thinking about those things and kind of the experiences that you had early on? Is there anything else to add on why this was the way to go?
Yeah, it's been a journey, Jen. I mean, most of my career has been focused on health and healthcare, right? So public health, looking at disease prevention. I have a huge passion for all the kind of innovative approaches to prevent disease, to empower communities to live healthier, sustainable lives. Looking at things like the built environment, affordable housing, food sustainability, access to healthy food, that sort of thing. That's just been kind of my background and training. And now it's really exciting to see that kind of merging together with traditional healthcare, which has been another big part of my career, right? Like seeing all the explosion around Health 2.0. I remember volunteering at the first Health 2.0 conference years ago, and just kind of being extraordinarily fascinated by what's happening in the future. And that's when I launched the Pulse and Signal blog about 11 years ago, and interviewed a number of people. So this has been like my whole body of work. And then, fast forward to 2016, which was a pivotal year for me, where I had the honor of coming back to my alma mater, which is the University of Maryland School of Public Health, and giving the commencement address, right? So here I am on stage with the teachers that taught me, when I was 19, 20 years old, and speaking into the lives of about 3,000 students getting ready to go out into the real world, kind of, reflecting on my own kind of pathway, and really inspiring and encouraging them to get out there, see how people live, work, and play, and really kind of learn how people thrive, and really kind of dig into the psychology of people, and then get working on building something, right? And so it was that opportunity and a number of other things spiraling around that time that really kind of lit a fire under me to build something. And I thought that the best way to do that was to ensure that there was an amazing workforce that was able to see all the things that I've seen over the past decade of my career, and easily plug them into those kind of opportunities in an accelerated way. So essentially, I'm really focused at this point in my career and this body of work to connect, equip, and launch people into amazing opportunities to build the future of health.
I love it. I love it. I mean, and that's what, we live in just such tandem tracks here, and that we're both kind of talking about these two areas of inclusion, ours in including those diverse individuals and giving feedback and testing products and being part of that. And you're really doing it, at the forefront with the workforce. And I guess my question to you is that, where are the other areas that we're missing, that we're not talking about inclusion? And also thinking about that too is, what would you tell those individuals who need to go back tomorrow and try to think about how they can be inclusive with what they're working with today? So what advice would you give them as well?
Yeah, and just to your first point, Jen, I mean, there's a number of different areas. Obviously, we're talking about co-creation of solutions on the workforce, but there's so many events and conferences that happen these days. This is another great place and great opportunity to practice this kind of inclusion piece, right? Like being really intentional about who shows up on panels, right? That's been a real big pain point across the board, at conferences and events. So for event planners and companies who are, producing these kind of opportunities, like really take some time to plan and think about who you want showing up at your event, whether those are attendees or speakers. The inclusion piece is going to be huge. How do you give better access to these events and things of that nature? So that's another area I just want to just kind of toss in there, especially as we're going back into the fall. Everybody's kind of coming off of summer break, and now we're getting ready for conference season again. So that's something that is a really kind of right in our face takeaway
Well, I'll share a story with you. I was
Yeah.
online looking at one of the upcoming conferences I was at, probably in the spring, and I'm scrolling through the speakers, and my husband walked by and he said, "Are those conference speakers?" And I said, "Yeah, why?" He goes, "It just looks like a bunch of white dudes." Yep, that's accurate.
Yeah, I mean,
Take notice.
yeah, I mean, and kudos to your husband for even pointing that out, right? I mean, it's one of those situations where it's becoming less and less acceptable, right? And for many reasons, and that's part of the exciting part of my job is to like find amazing people and to just kind of connect. I mean, that's been my thing for as long as I can remember, is connecting with amazing people. And now I get to do that, as part of a vision and what we're doing for Onboard Health. And so, yeah, I mean, anytime that you're gonna, connect people or people are congregating around like a concept or a brand, like think about, the variety and the diversity of people that are out here. One of my friends, Antoinette Carroll, she just became a TED Fellow, and just a brilliant kind of inclusion designer. She runs this conference called Design and Diversity, particularly for diverse designers from around the country. And this is kind of everything's looking for me like looking at a lens for right now and into the future, right? So the more that we invite more diverse people to our meetings and to our events and things of that nature, it's just going to be better for industries, for companies, and for the future of whatever is being built in the industry as a whole. So I would definitely say so the conferences and events thing, we can definitely add that into what we're talking about. And as far as advice, I mean, there's so much out there around, educating yourself around how to build a more inclusive workspace for your employees, right? Asking questions, changing how communications come out, right? So first and foremost, I'm a big, proponent of just kind of reading and seeing what is happening before you kind of jump out there and do something that you might not feel confident of, right? So, reading what's currently out there, and just kind of connecting with the people who are building these solutions already, right? So there's a number of chief diversity officers now. I remember having a conversation several weeks back with the chief diversity officer at Humana, and just kind of hearing what is being done at these companies is pretty inspiring, and always an opportunity to learn. So definitely kind of learning and seeing what's going on, and then finding some really great, trustworthy partners to make things happen. So that's what we're here for, and that's what excites me about the future, is that there's resources and that there are opportunities to do things right.
Yeah, I love it. And I love that you talk about, the future of health and designing that with a diverse workforce. We talk about the future of health is co-designed with patients and people with these health conditions. So you don't have to convince me, but that's why I've asked you, because you're so awesome. And I'm so happy that you can be sharing, your learnings with those who are starting to dip their toe and how can they make an impact? Because like you say, I truly believe people are working towards that. They just need those kind of actionable steps. So I'm grateful you were here to share that. So before we close, let's dive into some of our rapid fire questions that I always just love to, get to know people a little bit better. So when you're not out being savvy doing this kind of stuff and helping others, what do you do? What are you doing for fun?
Yeah. Let's see. So, well, I have a toddler at home. So my daughter usually keeps me on my toes and busy.
Yep.
And I think that for me, just kind of seeing the world through her eyes right now is really kind of giving me a refreshed lens myself in this kind of work that I'm doing around people and how she interacts with other, kids her age now at daycare, and just kind of seeing that, and diversity is actually like a big part of what we've built into like her experiences, just kind of seeing a number of people interacting, talking, meeting. And it's just really amazing to see how a lot of like what we've layered onto ourselves as adults does not apply to toddlers running around. So that, so I would say like that takes up a big chunk of my time.
Yeah. All right. How about something quirky that people don't necessarily know about you?
Quirky. Okay. So a number of years ago, I attended TED which was in Washington D.C. And so I was kind of writing about the event. That's back when I was doing a lot of blogging and things of that nature. And I got a chance to. This is one of the years that Richard Simmons came out. And apart from like leading the entire TED crowd and like some exercise and like aerobics and all that kind of good stuff, I got to meet him backstage doing some interviews and things of that nature. And I remember just like, he's just such an awesome, like lovable guy. And so he gave me this hug and was like, you're such a teddy bear. I was like, okay, well, so that was one of the first experiences that I've been at a health conference and just had this like non-healthcare work-related experience. And so Richard Simmons is awesome. And so, yeah, Richard Simmons called me a teddy bear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. I mean, this could be a loaded question since we know one of them, but what is one of the biggest healthcare challenges or headaches that we need to address? Maybe beyond inclusion, what else do we need to be thinking about?
Let's see. Once again, for me, like access is huge, right? And access in a way that that people like understand. So in public health, I was really interested in health literacy and how people understood messages and health communications. Like once again, like we can be, in our offices, like creating all these kind of campaigns and things of that nature. But if they don't resonate with the people that we're trying to, help stay healthy, then it's pretty pointless, right? So I feel like one of the biggest challenges is that there's just so much going on right now. And for me, especially like in the innovation landscape, making sure that things translate to the people who need the services is a priority, right? We see tons of like funding and millions of dollars going into different places, but once again, like if they don't change the lives of the people that they're intended to, then I think we still have a big problem. So we can convene at conferences all we want, but I think it's going to be really important to once again like keep that focus around design and user experience and literacy at the forefront of a lot of these things that we're doing.
Well, again, couldn't agree more. So now my favorite question is, what song title do you think best describes the current state of healthcare?
Song titles, okay. That best describes. So I'm a big Supernatural fan. That might be another quirky thing. So I would say the television series, and so I would say that Carry On Wayward Son by Kansas.
Yes.
And mainly because if you listen to the words, like it has a lot to do with like, thinking that, you're doing something, but still being blind. Like, once I rose above the noise and confusion, right? And I feel like right now there's a lot of stuff going on in healthcare, right? Technology, design, there's a lot of great things. There's a lot of mediocre things still going on. And I think having that need by a lot of different things, and oftentimes like we might think we're going down the right pathway, but once again ties back to co-creation and talking to the right people. There's definitely that kind of connection between what's happening, what we're forecasting, what's really cool and hypey and that sort of thing, versus what's actually practical and valuable right now.
Yeah, well, I love that. That's going on our Spotify playlist. So
yes.
All right, so closing out, anything else that you're working on that you want to plug? Any new initiatives that you need to tell people about? We want to know.
Yeah. So I'm excited that version 3 of the Onboard Health website is happening this month. So stay tuned for that launch at the end of this month. We're definitely looking forward to kind of launching a new streamlined version that makes it a lot easier to kind of engage with content with each other inside the community and things of that nature. So stay tuned for that, and then follow us on Twitter, Onboard Health, and LinkedIn as well. We're sharing a bunch of different resources, and we have some amazing people that we're retweeting and sharing. And shouts to Dr. Esther Chu, who's an emergency physician who's been super outspoken around gender equality, particularly in the health and medicine landscape. She was on CNN over the weekend talking about the gender pay gap and just kind of tackling some very ignorant commentary from a physician around why women should get paid less and that sort of thing. So we're living in some times where people and voices are being given platforms, and obviously there's the internet and everything else is a dual-edged sword. But for the stuff that really matters, I'm just really excited to be around in these times to just kind of build the future and build the future for the people who need it.
Amazing. Well, we're so glad that you are. So thank you for all your tireless work. I know it's a lot, especially with a toddler, but the work does not go unnoticed. So thank you for that. And before we close, certainly we'll plug next week, which will be a lovely transition from what we're doing here and complement it very well. We'll be talking with Vanessa Mason, who is a founder at the venture capital firm To Health, and she's going to be talking with us about having breadth and purpose. And it's going to be an awesome conversation, piggybacking on this because they're interested in investing in underrepresented founders, making sure we have diversity within developing the public health space. So it's going to be an awesome conversation. I know, Andre, you'll probably want to catch that one too. So before we sign off, I just want to thank you again, and I'll let you close it out by saying goodbye to our audience, and we'll catch you guys at our regularly scheduled time on Sunday night at 8 p.m. Eastern.
All right. Thank you so much, Jen, and thank you everybody for tuning in.
All right. Take care, everybody. Bye now.